The small military town of Norfolk, Virginia, had seen its fair share of uniforms. Navy blues, marine greens, army camo. It was the sort of place where everyone carried themselves with discipline, where rank and service commanded respect. But for Sergeant Claire Donovan, respect was never handed over easily. At 28, she had already given nearly a decade of her life to the Army. She had deployed twice to Afghanistan, earned commendations under fire, and lost 2 close friends along the way. Yet back home, on the base where she worked as part of a joint training task force, what most people saw wasn't her courage or her service. They saw only that she was a woman in uniform, and for some, that was enough reason to sneer. The moment it happened was as ordinary as it was humiliating. It was a cloudy Tuesday morning, damp air rolling in off the Atlantic. Claire stood at attention outside the headquarters building, waiting for the arrival of a high-ranking officer. It was standard protocol. Whenever a visiting commander or official arrived, soldiers on duty saluted as a sign of respect. Claire knew her posture was sharp. Her boots were polished, her uniform crisp. She raised her hand in a precise, steady salute as a black government SUV pulled up. But before the commander even stepped out, a voice cut through the still air. "Look at that, she practices in the mirror every morning," laughter followed. A cluster of sailors, young men in their 20s, stood just off to the side. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered with an arrogant smirk, had spoken loud enough for everyone to hear. His name was Petty Officer Rick Wallace. He had a reputation around the base, bold, cocky, always trying to get a laugh out of his buddies. Claire's jaw tightened, but her hand didn't waver. She didn't so much as glance in his direction. "Bet she thinks the commander's actually going to notice her," Wallace added, shaking his head. Cute little salute. Wasting her time. The others chuckled, trying to stifle their laughter. The humiliation burned hot in Claire's chest, but she stood like stone, because Claire knew something they didn't. The man stepping out of the SUV wasn't just a senior officer. He was a Navy SEAL commander, a man who had served in combat theaters most people only read about in newspapers. A man who had seen soldiers break under pressure and had learned to recognize quiet strength when others ignored it. And Claire had crossed paths with him before. Though no one on this base knew the story, the commander's boots hit the pavement. Claire's salute remained sharp, unwavering. And then it happened. Something no one expected. The SEAL commander paused. He looked directly at her, and slowly, with deliberate respect, he returned the salute. It was crisp. It was precise. And it was not casual. The mocking laughter behind her fell dead silent. Wallace froze where he stood, his grin wiped clean. His friend shifted uncomfortably. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the wind pushing against the flag overhead. The commander gave the smallest nod to Claire, a silent acknowledgement before continuing inside. And just like that, he was gone. But the weight of what had just happened stayed heavy in the air. Claire lowered her hand, her expression calm though her heart was pounding. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew the look on Wallace's face without seeing it, the shock, the confusion. Because the one thing arrogant men like him never expected was respect given to the woman they mocked. That night, the story spread across the base like wildfire. Soldiers whispered about it in the mess hall. Sailors repeated it in hushed tones, wondering what it meant. And Claire, she went back to her quarters, alone, the weight of the salute replaying in her mind. It wasn't just about Wallace. It wasn't even about the commander. It was about every time she'd been told she didn't belong. Every time she'd been told to leave. The tough stuff to the men. Every time her worth had been measured in doubt instead of courage. That salute had cut through all of it, but she also knew respect like that came with a price. And soon enough, she would find out just how high that price could be. Because Wallace wasn't the type of man to be humbled quietly, and the battles fought off the field could sometimes be the most dangerous of all. The salute should have been the end of it, a simple moment of respect one soldier to another. But on a base like Norfolk, where egos ran high and reputations carried more weight than truth, moments like that had a way of cutting deep. For Rick Wallace, it cut like a blade. The SEAL commander's returned salute replayed in his head all afternoon. The way the other sailors had stopped laughing. The way Claire's calm, unflinching posture made his mockery look small, and Wallace couldn't stand feeling small. That night, in the dim barracks lounge, Wallace leaned against a vending machine with two of his closest buddies. His voice carried low, laced with bitterness. "She thinks she's better than us, just because the commander noticed her." One of the sailors shrugged. "Maybe it was nothing, man." "Nothing?" Wallace snapped. "He doesn't salute nobodies." She had to have planned it. Probably knew him before. Probably begged for that nod. The bitterness twisted into something uglier. The others stayed quiet, letting his anger build. Wallace wasn't about to let it go. He wanted payback. Claire felt it the next morning. The stares in the cafeteria. The quiet snickers behind her back. Someone had taped a scrap of paper to her locker. Little Miss Commander's pet. She tore it off without a word, but her hands trembled for a moment before she clenched them into fists. She had faced worse. In Afghanistan, she had fought through sandstorms, RPG fire, and nights where the sound of helicopters meant both rescue and danger. She had carried wounded men twice her size out of blast zones. She had written letters to grieving families when others couldn't. But this was different. This was humiliation planted right where she lived. A different kind of battlefield. One where the enemy didn't attack with bullets but with whispers. By Friday, the whispers grew. "Did you hear? Donovan only got into the army because of connections. SEAL commander probably has a soft spot for her. Figures. She doesn't belong here. Never did." Claire's shoulders stayed square, but inside the weight was heavy. She hadn't asked for the salute. She hadn't asked for the respect. And now she was paying the price for it. It was late one evening when the backlash took a darker turn. Claire was leaving the gym, sweat cooling on her back, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Wallace leaning against a wall, arms crossed, waiting. "Not so sharp now, huh, Sergeant?" His voice carried mockery laced with menace. Claire stopped, meeting his stare. Her instinct was to walk away, but years in uniform had taught her something important. Backing down wasn't always the safest choice. "You got something to say, petty officer?" she asked evenly. Wallace smirked. "Just funny. You stand there, salute like you own the place, and then he, of all people, salutes you back. Makes the rest of us look like fools." "I didn't ask for it," Claire said, her voice controlled. "No," Wallace sneered, stepping closer. "But you sure soaked it up. Don't think we don't notice. You think the commander respects you? You think anybody here really does?" His words stung, but Claire didn't flinch. She locked her gaze on him. "Respect isn't yours to give or take." For a moment, the corridor was silent. Wallace's jaw tightened. She could see the fury in his eyes, the kind of fury born from pride bruised in public. He wanted her to break, but she wouldn't. She walked past him, her boots echoing in the hall, never looking back. 2 days later, Claire found herself summoned to the office of Captain Reynolds, the base's commanding officer. She entered, saluted, and waited. The captain was an older man, silver hair cropped close, his desk stacked with files. He motioned for her to sit. "Sergeant Donovan," he began, his tone heavy. "There have been concerns raised." Claire's brow furrowed. "Concerns, sir?" "Allegations," Reynolds said carefully. "That you may have acted inappropriately during last week's salute." The words hit like a blow. "Sir, I was at my post." I rendered a standard salute. That's all. Reynolds studied her. His eyes weren't cruel, but they carried the weary skepticism of a man who'd seen too many disputes. "Be that as it may, Petty Officer Wallace has filed a report claiming you sought undue attention. That your actions were, his words, unprofessional." Claire's heart thudded. Wallace had filed a report? Over a salute? "Sir," she said firmly, "with respect, that's false." "I believe you," Reynolds said quietly. "But these things, they get political. You understand, political. That was the word everyone used when truth didn't seem to matter." Claire sat straighter. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" The captain nodded. "I didn't ask for that salute. I didn't even expect it. But I've given this army almost 10 years of my life. I've lost people. I've bled for the flag that flies outside your window, and I will not have my service reduced to a joke or a rumor." Reynolds watched her, his jaw tightening just slightly. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Finally, he said, "Dismissed." Claire left with her head high, but her chest was heavy. Wallace wasn't just mocking her anymore. He was building a case, twisting something simple into something ugly. And she knew what that meant. The real fight was only beginning. That night, Claire sat alone in her small apartment off base. The glow of the desk lamp lit a framed photo of her unit from Afghanistan, 8 faces grinning in dusty uniforms. 2 of those faces were gone now, their names etched on memorials. She remembered one of them, Corporal Ramirez, telling her during a night watch years ago, "They'll never see you coming, Donovan. That's your strength. They'll underestimate you, and that's when you win." She closed her eyes, those words echoing. She had been underestimated before. She had been doubted, mocked, even ignored. But every time she had found a way to rise. This time would be no different, because if Wallace thought a smear campaign would break her, he didn't know who he was dealing with. The next morning, Claire returned to duty. Head high, shoulders squared, her uniform crisp. She walked past whispers, past stares, past the very men who wanted her to fold. And as she did, something flickered across their faces, something none of them wanted to admit. Not doubt. Not humor, but the first hint of fear. Because sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who refused to bend, were the hardest to break. And Wallace was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The weeks that followed were like walking through a storm without shelter. Everywhere Claire went, she felt the weight of stares. In the mess hall, voices dipped when she walked past. In the gym, conversations paused. Even in training exercises, where teamwork should have been ironclad, she caught men exchanging smirks when she gave orders. Wallace had gotten under their skin. Rumors moved faster than truth on a base, and Wallace knew how to spread them like poison, just enough to cast doubt, just enough to make people wonder. She's got friends in high places. She's trying to climb by looking good, not working hard. She's only here because the commander favors her. It didn't matter that none of it was true. What mattered was that the seed had been planted. But Claire kept her head down. She showed up early. She trained harder than anyone. She executed her duties with precision. She refused to give Wallace the satisfaction of seeing her break until the night it all boiled over. It was a Friday, a humid night, with the air heavy and restless. The junior enlisted had gathered at a local bar just off base, a dim, crowded place where the music was loud, the beer was cheap, and reputations were tested in shadows. Claire hadn't planned to go. She hated the scene, but her squad leader had insisted. If you keep to yourself, they'll say you're hiding. Sometimes showing up is half the fight. So she went. She wore jeans and a plain shirt, her hair pulled back, nothing flashy. She walked into the bar and immediately felt the shift in the air. Eyes tracked her. Whispers spread. She ignored them, heading for the table where a couple of fellow sergeants sat. But Wallace was there too. He leaned against the bar with his usual swagger, a drink in hand. His buddies clustered around him. When he saw her, his grin widened like a predator spotting prey. "Well, well," he called out over the noise. "Look who decided to join the real soldiers tonight." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut. Claire ignored him. She sat with her fellow NCOs, tried to focus on their small talk, but Wallace wasn't about to let it go. Minutes later, he walked over. His buddies followed, circling like sharks. "You know," Wallace said loudly enough for half the bar to hear, "I've been thinking about that salute, wondering why the commander would bother with someone like you, unless, of course, you gave him a reason." The words hung in the air like a blade. The implication was filthy, calculated to wound. The bar went quiet. Conversations died. All eyes turned to Claire. Her heart hammered, but she forced her voice steady. "That's enough, Wallace," he smirked, stepping closer. "What? Can't handle a little truth? Everyone's been wondering the same thing. Might as well say it out loud." The laughter this time was crueler, emboldened. Claire stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. She looked him square in the eye. "You don't scare me," she said, her voice like steel. For a second, the grin faltered. Wallace hadn't expected her to confront him in front of everyone, but then he doubled down, his pride refusing to yield. "Scare you? No. But expose you? Absolutely." And with that, he shoved her shoulder. Not hard enough to be called an assault, but hard enough to be a challenge, hard enough to make every soldier in the room hold their breath. Claire's instinct screamed, Training told her to respond, but she also knew the trap. If she struck back even to defend herself, Wallace would twist it. She'd be the aggressor. She'd be the one punished. Her fists curled at her sides. She could taste blood in her mouth from biting back her rage, and then, "Enough!" The voice boomed across the bar, sharp and commanding. Every head snapped toward the door. Standing there was the SEAL commander, the very same man whose salute had sparked this fire. The room went silent, as if oxygen itself had been sucked away. The commander's gaze locked on Wallace. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room like a storm front rolling in. "Petty officer," the commander said, his voice low and dangerous. "Step away, now." Wallace froze, caught like a child with his hand in the flame. Slowly he stepped back, his bravado collapsing under the weight of those eyes. The commander turned to Claire. His expression softened, just slightly. He gave her the faintest nod, an unspoken assurance that she wasn't alone. Then he faced the room. "I've fought wars on 3 continents. I've buried men braver than anyone in this bar. And let me tell you something. Respect isn't given because of gender. It's earned in blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And Sergeant Donovan," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "has earned more respect than most of you ever will." No one moved. No one dared breathe. The commander's gaze swept the crowd one last time. "You don't have to like it, but you will respect it." And just like that, he walked out. For a long moment, the bar stayed frozen. The music had stopped. The laughter was gone. Wallace stood rigid, his face pale, his pride shattered. Claire's hands trembled at her sides, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of vindication. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply walked out into the night, leaving the whispers behind. Back in her apartment hours later, she sat in the silence, the echo of the commander's words still ringing in her ears. Respect isn't given because of gender. It's earned. And tonight, for the first time in weeks, Claire felt the tide begin to turn. But she also knew something else. Wallace wasn't finished. His pride wouldn't let him be. And when men like him were cornered, they could become dangerous. The real test was still to come. The night at the bar should have silenced Wallace. For most men, the humiliation of being dressed down in front of half the base would have been enough. But for Wallace, it only festered. He couldn't shake the commander's words. Couldn't shake the nod of respect that Claire had earned. To him, that night wasn't the end. It was a challenge, and he wasn't about to lose. The weeks that followed were tense. Claire noticed it immediately. The whispers faded, but the stares from Wallace grew colder. He didn't joke anymore. Didn't taunt. Instead, he watched. Quietly, calculating. Her gut told her it wasn't over. And then the hammer fell. One Tuesday morning, Claire was called into Captain Reynolds's office again. She stepped inside, saluted, and saw the stack of papers on his desk. The captain's face was grim. "Sergeant Donovan," he said heavily, "you've been accused of misconduct." Claire's stomach dropped. "Sir, Wallace has filed an official complaint. He's alleging you attempted to leverage personal connections with the SEAL commander for favoritism." The captain's jaw tightened at the absurdity, but his voice stayed formal. "He claims your service record is built on inappropriate means." The words were like poison in her ears. "That's a lie," she said firmly. "I believe you," Reynolds said, his eyes meeting hers. "But the paperwork is here. Regulations require an inquiry. You'll need to defend yourself before the board." Claire's throat went dry. An inquiry, on record. Her career, her honor, everything could hang in the balance, and Wallace knew it. The day of the inquiry arrived. A panel of officers sat at a long table, their uniforms crisp, their faces unreadable. Claire stood at attention before them, her heart steady but heavy. Wallace was there too, sitting smugly in his chair, his arms crossed as though he'd already won. The lead officer began. "Sergeant Donovan, you are accused of unprofessional conduct and exploiting personal connections for preferential treatment. Do you have a response?" Claire lifted her chin. "Yes, sir. My response is simple. I have served with honor. I have earned every stripe on my sleeve, every commendation in my file. I never asked for special treatment. I never sought it, and I never will." Her voice carried through the room, strong, unshaking. Wallace leaned forward. She's lying. Everyone knows it. You don't get a salute like that without... But he never finished the sentence. The door opened and in walked the SEAL commander. The room shifted instantly. Chairs straightened. Officers glanced at each other. Even Wallace froze. The commander strode to the front, his presence filling the space like a tide rising. He looked directly at the panel. "I requested to speak," he said simply. The lead officer nodded. "Proceed, Commander." The commander's gaze turned, steady and sharp. "I returned Sergeant Donovan's salute because she earned it. Not through favoritism, not through connections. Through service. Through sacrifice." He stepped closer, his voice lowering but growing heavier with each word. "In Afghanistan, during a joint operation, my team was pinned down under heavy fire. We were taking casualties. And Sergeant Donovan, this woman, risked her life to drag one of my men out of the kill zone. She patched him up under fire, and when we regrouped, she held the line with us until reinforcements arrived." The room was silent. Every eye was on him. The commander's jaw tightened. "I don't salute lightly. I don't salute out of pity. I saluted Sergeant Donovan because she is the kind of soldier who makes others stand taller. And anyone who says otherwise is not only wrong, they insult every man and woman who's given their all in combat." He turned then, his eyes locking onto Wallace. "And you, petty officer, you should know better than to tarnish a fellow service member for the sake of your pride." Wallace's face went pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The lead officer cleared his throat. "Thank you, Commander. That will be noted." He looked down the table, then back at Claire. "Sergeant Donovan, the board finds no evidence of misconduct. The inquiry is dismissed." Relief flooded through Claire, but she didn't show it. She stood tall, saluted, and said, "Thank you, sir." As the board dismissed, Wallace slumped in his chair, his career now hanging by a thread. His lies had collapsed under the weight of truth. But Claire didn't even look at him. Her eyes followed the commander. He gave her the smallest nod again, the same one he'd given her weeks before. A silent message that respect, once earned, was never forgotten. That evening, Claire walked alone across the base as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. She passed soldiers and sailors on her way back to her quarters. Some nodded. Others straightened slightly as she walked by. No words were spoken, but the shift was there. They saw her differently now, not as a target for mockery, not as a subject of rumor, but as a soldier who had stood through the storm unbroken. Back in her room, she set her cap on the desk and sat by the window, staring out at the fading light. She thought of the men she'd served with overseas, the ones she'd lost, the ones she'd saved. And she thought of Ramirez's words, spoken years ago under a foreign sky. "They'll underestimate you, and that's when you win." He had been right because Wallace had underestimated her. Many of them had. And in the end, she had won, not with fists, not with anger, but with truth. The salute had started it all. A moment of respect, a spark. And now it had become something more. A reminder that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stands silent, steady, unshaken. And when the world finally sees it, when the truth breaks through the doubt, it commands respect from even the highest ranks. Weeks later, Claire stood again in the same place where it all began, outside headquarters, the flag snapping in the wind. Another officer arrived, another round of salutes. She lifted her hand, crisp and sharp, just as before. This time no laughter followed. No whispers, only silence. And when the officer returned the gesture, Claire held it with quiet pride. Because she knew now, a salute wasn't just a motion of the hand. It was a recognition of everything she had fought for. Everything she had endured. Everything she had proven, and no one could take that from her.